Welcome to the video for lesson 4, where we're going to be constructing angle and segment bisectors / perpendicular bisectors. So before we get into these constructions, it's important to actually understand what the word bisect and bisector means. So this is something that you guys should start to drill into your head. So the word bisect means to cut in half. So this is a concept that we are going to be revisiting in every single unit. So get comfortable with that word bisector and start to associate it with the fact that we are cutting things in half or equally into two congruent parts. So there are two types of bisectors that we're working with. We have the angle bisector and we have a segment bisector. Now, if you know what bisector means, you can probably assume what an angle bisector and a segment bisector do. An angle bisector splits an angle up into two congruent pieces, and a segment bisector splits a segment up into two congruent pieces. So again, splitting it into two congruent pieces is the same thing as saying it's splitting it in half. So for an angle bisector, you want to get in the habit of labeling your congruent parts. As always, we're always encouraging you guys to do this. So this says that OC, which it should be labeled as a ray, is the angle bisector of angle AOB. So OC is this ray right here. And if we know that it's the angle bisector, we can go ahead and label our congruent angles. So I know that angle AOC is congruent to angle COB. And we show that with our arc marks. Now, a segment bisector is the same exact construction as the perpendicular bisector. So this is important because if you have a photo like this, and let's say we knew that line CD here was the segment bisector, we know that AM or AD and DB, we know that those two segments are congruent, right? That's what bisect means. It means that when we intersect a line, and it's intersecting the line right here, that we are cutting it into two congruent parts. So think back to your prior vocabulary. The point here that's splitting our segment into two congruent parts, we can describe it as a word that we already know. That word that we already know is a midpoint. So when a bisector intersects the line where it's cutting it in half, it meets at the midpoint. So get in the habit of labeling your congruent segments, but also when we're doing this construction, so segment bisector is a good definition to know. However, the construction specifically is going to be created with perpendicular lines. So that means that we're going to have 90-degree angles in our diagram, and we have to get used to labeling those things. So next thing, we're going to actually get into these constructions. So you guys don't have these things marked, but in this space right here for angle bisector construction, with your straight edge, draw two lines where your angle looks something like this. You can pause it and do that. And then for the next one, for segment bisector, what you're going to do is take your straight edge and do your best to draw a segment, and you're going to label that as PQ. So do that before you move on with the rest of the video. All right, first things first, we have our segment bisector. Our angle bisector. So your first step, now when you're copying a segment or making a triangle, your first step was always to make a reference line. However, when we're working with angles, anytime, we're going to be making a reference angle instead. Now that reference angle, you can make your compass as wide or as narrow as you'd like. You need to just make sure that your needle is on your vertex, and then you can go ahead and make your reference arc. Now, the only specific thing that you need to do is make sure that your reference line intersects your angle at 2 points. So if you want to, I would literally make a checklist and be like, okay, I'm touching it once here and once here, so far I'm good. After you make your reference arc, what you want to do is actually measure the opening of the angle. Now, the reason you're making this reference arc is because you're going to use the intersection points here to help you measure how much your angle is actually open. So my needle is going on one of my intersection points, my pencil's going on the other, and this right here, this length represents how open my angle is. Now what you need to do is you can keep your compass open to this full length of the opening. However, a common theme that you might hear is, hey, open up your compass more than halfway of this length. So this, I would say, is more than halfway. And then what you're going to do is from one of your intersection points, you're going to draw an arc this way. Then keeping your compass width the same, you're going to draw your arcs this way. And again, a common theme is making sure that your arcs intersect, because that's where we're drawing our point, and that's where we're going to take our straight edge and draw a line or a ray through that point. Now I'm going to label this point D. So now I know that ray AD is the angle bisector of angle BAK. So there are some different conclusions we can make. One conclusion, I'll draw it in blue, is that angle BAD is congruent to angle DAK. And you can write that out. You should write that out. So angle BAD is congruent to angle DAK. Awesome. Now, again, if you kept your compass open to the full length, you would have had successful arcs that intersected as well. But the main thing is that, like, sometimes your angle might be opened too wide, and sometimes your compass might not be able to stretch out the full length. So that's why, as long as you are more than halfway, you're good. So if your compass can stretch out the full way, and we could do this in a different color, you'll see that it will still work. So you draw your intersection from, or you draw your arc from one intersection point, then from the other intersection point, and you can see that we would draw our line through this green point here, and it ends up being the same ray. So whether you go the full length or more than halfway, you would get the same exact answer. All right, now make sure in your segment that you guys drew that you label it as PQ. So this one's a little bit more straightforward. Now remember, this is segment bisector or perpendicular bisector. Those are the same exact constructions. So first things first is you put your needle on one of your endpoints. And again, it's that concept of you can stretch your compass out the full length and it would be successful. However, you'll see a common theme of more than halfway. So we're opening up our compass more than halfway, and we're going to make two sets of arcs from each endpoint. So here's one arc that we're going to make. We're going to make another arc up top. After that, I'm going to move to my other endpoint while I'm keeping my compass width the same. I will make one up here and one down here. Now, this is sufficient enough. I see that my arcs are intersecting, so this is enough to draw a point. Some people like to just take their compass, though, and do the full arc. Either way is fine. If you leave spaces or if you want to draw the entire circle, that is totally up to you. But what you can see is this kind of looks like a little fish, how people were explaining it. Some students said that last year. But again, we have our arcs intersecting. We draw our point, and then we take our straight edge and connect it straight down. So again, I want to show you guys in green. So we did the more than halfway condition. However, if you wanted to go the full length and make your arcs, it might go off the screen. And again, the green is not something you need to do, but I just want to show you guys that if you kept your compass the full length of your segment, and I know it went a little off the screen, but you can see that we get the same exact line. So more than halfway or the full length if your compass can reach it. Those are two things that you can use. Now again, we want to get in the habit of labeling our pieces. So I just constructed the bisector, or we just constructed the bisector, which means that at this point where I'm splitting my line, I know that I am cutting it directly in half here. So I know that that's the midpoint, and you guys should label this in your construction too. Here's our midpoint. We also know from this we can make other conclusions. I'm going to call this just point M for midpoint. I know from this that PM is congruent to MQ, so we should label that with our appropriate markings. Then also, I know that this is the perpendicular bisector, and we know that perpendicular lines always form our right angles. So we have 4 different right angles that are created, and you guys should label this in your diagram as well. So main things to note is that more than halfway condition will always work, but if you want to measure the full length and make your arcs like that, that totally works as well. And make sure you guys are labeling your congruent pieces in your constructions also.